Her daughter-in-law smirked as she cropped Evelyn out of the family photo. Again, no one noticed. No one cared. By the end of the month, Rachel and Scott would discover they didn't even own the roof over their heads. The deed had never been theirs. It had always been Evelyn's. She wasn't the forgotten matriarch anymore. She was the woman who sold the house out from under them and left with the keys to her peace. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The blade glinted under the dining room chandelier, catching the light with a dramatic flair Scott didn't deserve. He brandished it above the golden-brown bird like he'd hunted it himself, slicing into the breast with performative precision. At the head of the table, Rachel adjusted the place settings for the third time, snapping photos between sips of wine, her phone practically an extra limb. Evelyn sat at the far end, near the drafty window, her seat barely wide enough for the chipped plate in front of her. The gravy had gone cold. Scott looked up, grinning, the knife now poised for another cut. "Hope there's enough left after Grandma gets her plate," he said, his voice full of cheer. "That thing still eats?" Rachel snorted hard enough that her wine nearly went up her nose. "Oh my God, Scott," she wheezed, hiding her laughter behind her napkin. Even Mason and Noah looked startled. The boys, 12 and 9, darted glances toward Evelyn like they weren't sure if they were allowed to laugh, or if they'd just witnessed something mean dressed in a joke's clothes. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her spine stayed straight, her lips pressed into a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. She reached for the serving spoon, scooped a modest portion of green beans onto her plate, and said softly, "Thank you, Scott. You always know how to make things festive." There was a silence so thin you could have cracked it. Scott cleared his throat and returned to carving. "Hey, just trying to keep it light," he muttered, not looking up. Rachel tilted her phone to take a panoramic shot of the table. Evelyn saw, as always, that she was positioned just out of frame. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, folding her napkin with surgical precision. "I think I'll eat in my room." Scott glanced up. "You sure? We've got pumpkin pie coming." "I'm sure." She rose, slow and smooth, lifting her plate with both hands like it was precious. No one offered to help. Rachel had already turned back to her phone. The kids watched her go, eyes following her out of the room. Evelyn passed through the narrow hallway where family photos still hung, though hers had gradually migrated to the back of frames or disappeared entirely. She stepped into what used to be her room. Now it was labeled craft storage, with a chalkboard sign Rachel had hung for fun. Half her dresser was missing. Yarn bins sat where her nightstand once stood. She set her plate down on the small desk beneath the window. Outside, the oaks had lost most of their leaves, branches bare and rattling. The house creaked as if to remind her whose bones held it together. She slid open the drawer, pulled out her old laptop, and waited as it powered on with a groan. Her fingers hovered over the keys before she typed the words slowly, deliberately, "Real estate attorney near me." Search results flickered up the screen. Advertisements, directories, promises of fast closings and confidentiality. She didn't want fast. She wanted final. Her eyes caught one name in particular, not the first result, but the one that felt like fate. Carly Downs, discreet property transfer, senior planning, no public listings. Evelyn clicked the contact link. The intake form was brief. Name, phone number, reason for inquiry. Under details, she wrote just one line: owner of property, considering quiet sale, no family involvement. She hit send. Then she returned to her plate, cut her turkey into small bites, and chewed slowly. The cold meat had a rubbery texture, the stuffing was dry. But the silence? The silence tasted like steel. The first time Evelyn stepped into the foyer in 1980, the hardwood creaked under her shoes like a secret being told. The ceilings were lower than she'd dreamed, the plumbing questionable, and the kitchen counters chipped. But the price was right, the bones were solid, and Tom had looked at her with that grin that meant, "We'll make it ours." They signed the papers 2 weeks later. She'd stayed up nights that year grading spelling tests at the kitchen table with a mug of Sanka while Tom patched drywall with borrowed tools. They saved receipts in a shoebox, skipped vacations, and bought second-hand drapes instead of installing central air. By the 5th year, they'd paid off a quarter of the mortgage. By the 12th, it was theirs outright. Back then, Scott had run through the hallways barefoot, arms out like airplane wings. He used to call the living room the runway. Now he just called it open concept. Evelyn sat on the edge of the small daybed in her so-called craft room, what had once been her sanctuary, and stared at the wall where her wedding photo used to hang. Rachel had swapped it out for an abstract canvas she picked up at a home styling pop-up downtown. It had started 6 years ago. Scott lost his job at the bank. Just for a while, he said. Just until things leveled out. He'd asked if he, Rachel, and the boys could move in temporarily. Just a year, Mac's mom. But the months stacked like dust in corners. 1 year turned into 2, then 3. Then Rachel started repainting the kitchen cabinets to freshen things up. Evelyn's lace curtains were replaced with sleek linen panels that never quite kept the light out. Her grandmother's china disappeared from the display case, replaced by matte black dishes Rachel said were more minimalist. Evelyn's recliner was quietly donated. Her favorite crockpot replaced by a brushed steel monster with digital buttons she couldn't read. Somewhere along the way, her house stopped being hers, or so they thought. She reached into her filing cabinet, bottom drawer, under old lesson plans and tax folders, and pulled out a worn manila envelope. Inside, the deed. Her name. Only hers. Not co-owner, not joint tenant. Just Evelyn Shaw, in plain, elegant print. She held it in her lap like a relic, then smiled. They'd rewritten the furniture, the menu, even the family stories, but they hadn't touched the facts. She opened her laptop again. The email tab was still open, the form she'd filled out for Carly Downs confirmed. No reply yet. But Evelyn was nothing if not a woman of follow-through. She clicked compose and typed, "Subject, follow-up to my inquiry. Dear Ms. Downs, I'd like to explore a potential sale. Quietly, and with care. I believe you may be the right person. Best, Evelyn Shaw." She hesitated before hitting send, not out of doubt, but because she knew this email was a door closing, and behind that door were casseroles, birthdays, bedtime stories, and decades of compromise. But it was already too quiet in the house, already too late to fix what had been deliberately undone. She clicked send. The message whooshed into cyberspace just as Rachel passed the room, humming, carrying a pile of throw pillows Evelyn didn't recognize. Rachel didn't even glance inside. Good, Evelyn thought. Let her not see. Let them not see anything coming. An hour later, her inbox pinged. Carly's reply was short, clean, precise. "I specialize in silent exits. Can we talk tomorrow?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the walls of the room pressing in with a comfort she hadn't felt in years. Outside, wind whistled through the barren trees. The house creaked again, an old voice asking if she still remembered its real name. "I remember," Evelyn whispered to no one. And then she began to pack, mentally first, one boundary at a time. The remnants of Thanksgiving dinner were smeared across dishes stacked high beside the sink. Cranberry sauce hardened at the edges of glass bowls, and half-eaten rolls sat abandoned like an afterthought. The boys had wandered off to their room. Scott was already on the couch, half asleep, beer balanced on his chest as the post-game show flickered across the television. Evelyn stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, her fingers submerged in murky water gone cold. No one had offered to help. No one had thanked her for the pie she baked or noticed that the stuffing was still her late husband's recipe, the one with diced apples and sage. "Mom, I posted that cute pic of dinner," Rachel called from the living room, scrolling on her phone. "You should check it out." Evelyn dried her hands and walked to the hallway just enough to lean against the frame. "Which one?" Rachel flipped her phone around, screen glowing like a mirror Evelyn didn't recognize. The photo was tightly cropped, Scott holding the knife mid-carve, Rachel leaning in with a wine glass, the boys grinning awkwardly at either side. Evelyn wasn't in it. She hadn't been in the last few either. "Must have been the angle," Rachel offered, not looking up. "I'll tag you anyway." Evelyn nodded. "Appreciate that." Rachel had already moved on, laughing at a comment. Evelyn stepped away quietly and walked back toward her room. On the stairs, she passed a framed print of the boys' handprints in fall colors. Her own framed wedding photo, which had once hung there, was nowhere to be seen. She closed her door softly. Inside, she moved with deliberate calm. The closet door creaked slightly as she pulled it open, reaching past a stack of Rachel's seasonal decor bins to retrieve a thin wooden frame wrapped in tissue. She peeled back the cover, revealing the deed, original, untouched, corners yellowed but name sharp as ever. Evelyn Shaw, sole owner. She laid it on the bed and opened her desk drawer. Inside, her file folder labeled House Personal. She thumbed through water bills, property tax receipts, and maintenance agreements. Everything in her name, every envelope stamped with years of her handwriting. She pulled out her phone, tapped the camera, and began quietly photographing the documents. Click, swipe, click. There was no hurry, just a rhythm. No rush, just certainty. The house creaked again. She glanced toward the door. The boys were still upstairs. The hallway lights flickered once, then held steady. A car passed outside, headlights brushing across her window blinds like a warning or a blessing. She slipped the photos and the deed into a large white envelope and sealed it with a line of clear tape. Across the front, she wrote in block letters, Carly, private. There was a knock, soft. She opened the door to find Mason standing there in mismatched socks, fingers fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. Hi, Grandma. Hey, sweet pea. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned in to hug her, arms wrapping tight around her waist. She held him close, resting her chin on his head for a moment longer than usual. Thanks for the pie, he said. It was the only good one. Don't let your mom hear that, he smiled. She only made it from the box mix. She laughed, barely. Sleep well? Night, Grandma. After he left, she stood in the doorway a moment longer. The house was quiet, but not restful. It was the kind of quiet that followed a dismissal, the kind that came after being looked through, not at. She walked back to the closet and tucked the envelope into her handbag, resting it beneath her scarf. Then, looking around the room, at what used to be hers, she whispered under her breath, barely audible but sharpened by every syllable, "They forgot who built this." Next day, the chime above the cafe door gave a soft jingle as Evelyn stepped inside, the December wind tugging at her coat before the glass shut behind her. The coffee shop smelled of cinnamon syrup and roasted beans, but to Evelyn, the air felt heavier, like the last breath before a long dive. She spotted Carly immediately. The young woman sat by the window, blazer sharp, a legal pad already open beside her espresso. Her dark hair was tucked behind one ear, and she glanced up with a calm, unreadable expression, more therapist than realtor, and that suited Evelyn just fine. Mrs. Shaw? Carly stood, offering a firm handshake. Thank you for trusting me with this. Call me Evelyn, she replied, her voice measured, but warm. I've brought everything you asked for. She slipped into the seat across from Carly and set her tote bag on the table. From it, she drew the envelope, still marked in her careful handwriting, and opened it. One by one, she laid the papers out like old family photographs. The original deed from 1980, mortgage payoff records, tax returns, utility bills, all in her name. Carly's brows lifted slightly as she scanned the documents. These are immaculate. Evelyn smiled without humor. I was a teacher for 40 years. Filing was half the job. Carly flipped the deed to the last page and tapped Evelyn's signature. This is still valid. They never transferred title, never refinanced, never added themselves. Legally, they have no standing. Evelyn nodded once. I thought so. She looked out the window, watching a couple across the street loading Christmas decorations into the trunk of a Subaru. A string of red bows peeked from the box like something from an old memory. I don't want to hurt the boys, she said quietly. Mason and Noah, they're good kids. Carly set her pen down. Then we do this discreetly. No eviction, no notice. We find a buyer, we set a close date, and you walk away on your terms. Evelyn exhaled slowly. And Rachel? Scott? Uninformed until they have to be. You're within your rights. Carly leaned in. The house is yours. And it sounds like they've forgotten that. They forgot a lot of things, Evelyn murmured. Whose name is on the light bill? Who kept the roof from leaking? Who paid for private school when Scott flunked algebra sophomore year? Carly said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I want to sell, Evelyn said at last. Her voice was steady, no tremor left. Quietly. Understood. Carly pulled out a folder labeled listing agreement and slid it across the table. Initial here, sign there. Evelyn read every word. She didn't rush. With each pen stroke, she felt a strange clarity rising, like cleaning out an attic, dusty but freeing. When she was done, Carly took the paperwork and tucked it neatly into her own briefcase. I'll handle everything on my end. Photography, staging, buyer vetting. No MLS listings, no signs on the lawn. They won't know until you're ready for them to. Evelyn nodded and took a sip of her tea, now lukewarm but soothing all the same. Outside, the sun broke through the gray. It glinted off her wedding ring, still worn out of habit, or maybe memory. As Carly stood to leave, she paused, tilting her phone toward Evelyn. I already have a discreet buyer interested. DC couple, no kids, wants to move before spring. Evelyn blinked once. That was fast. Carly offered a small smile. I move fast, especially when someone's waited too long. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. The kitchen still smelled faintly of sage stuffing and honey-glazed carrots, but the air had turned stale, like the last breath of a house keeping a secret. Evelyn stood by the window in the den, her hands clasped behind her back, listening for the click of the front gate. She'd watched Rachel and the boys leave an hour earlier, errands and a lunch play date she'd overheard. Scott had followed soon after, golf bag slung over his shoulder and Bluetooth earpiece flashing blue as he barked something about closing before rates rise again. The house was still, quiet, the perfect time. The doorbell rang. Evelyn moved swiftly but calmly, opening the door to reveal Carly, flanked by a professionally dressed couple. The man was in his mid-40s, clean-cut in a navy peacoat. The woman wore a camel trench and held a leather notebook in one hand. Morning, Evelyn, Carly said, tone light but purposeful. This is the Barretts, from D.C. Welcome, Evelyn replied, stepping aside. Shoes off, please. They obeyed without question, slipping off boots and loafers. Evelyn led them through the house, speaking just above a whisper. This was our family home, bought in 1980. My husband installed those beams himself. She paused beneath the archway between the kitchen and dining room. He died 12 years ago. Cancer? I'm sorry, the woman said softly, her voice sincere. Evelyn nodded but kept moving. This floor plan, original. We never knocked anything down just because it wasn't trending. She let them admire the antique fixtures in the kitchen, the original oak cabinets, the mudroom with the checkerboard tile she and her husband had argued over and ultimately loved. When they entered the hallway off the stairs, Evelyn stopped. Here, she said, pointing to the faint pencil marks by the doorframe. Mason, Noah, every birthday. I couldn't bring myself to wipe it off. The woman placed her hand gently on the wood. That's beautiful. It was. They moved on. The tour ended in the backyard. Evelyn stood with them by the garden, now winter bare but still framed by the picket fence her husband had built. The couple exchanged a glance. The man spoke first. We'd like to offer full cash, he said. 30-day close, contingency free. Carly arched a brow in Evelyn's direction, letting the offer hang. Evelyn hesitated. Not out of uncertainty, just to feel the weight of it, the ache of finality. Then she nodded once, firm. I accept. No tears, no smile, just the clean break of decision. Carly pulled out a folder from her satchel. Then we'll start title transfer today. You'll receive paperwork by secure email by the end of the day. Evelyn walked them out. As the Barretts stepped off the porch, she noticed a robin fluttering onto the banister, a little off-season, as if it had forgotten winter had begun. Just as she closed the door behind them, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. keys jangling, quick heels up the walkway. Rachel. Evelyn's spine straightened instinctively. The door opened before she could move. Rachel entered, sunglasses atop her head, reusable shopping bags in one hand. She froze mid-step. "Who were they?" she asked, narrowing her eyes toward the front door. "Why is there a real estate agent here?" Carly smiled professionally, not missing a beat. "Appraisers. Evelyn asked for a new property assessment for insurance purposes." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "We just renewed that policy." Evelyn turned, voice cool. "Yes, and the numbers felt off. I wanted a second opinion." Rachel opened her mouth, but Carly stepped forward, already tucking away her pen. "Thanks for your time, Evelyn. I'll be in touch by end of day." Rachel moved aside, stunned into silence as the trio exited. Evelyn walked past her, calm as ever. "Hope the boys had fun," she said, heading to the kitchen. Rachel didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the closed front door, then back at Evelyn, suspicion blooming behind her lashes. Evelyn first saw it on Rachel's tablet, left open on the kitchen island while she was folding linens. The screen glowed with a floral Evite preview. "Holiday brunch at the Shaw home, December 23rd, 11 a.m., casual elegance, adults only." She read it twice. No mention of her, no RSVP link in her inbox. She folded the last napkin with careful precision and placed it in the drawer. Later that evening, as she watered the poinsettias in the foyer, she overheard them in the living room. "I told Marcy she could bring that cranberry walnut cake thing," Rachel said, her voice airy with performance. "I want the spread to be clean and upscale, not like whatever my mom used to throw together." "Your mom?" Scott chuckled. "Babe, my mom still lives here." "Oh, right." Rachel's laugh was tight. "Well, our house now." Evelyn didn't step in. She simply turned off the faucet and walked up the stairs, her hand trailing the polished wood railing that still had the chip in it from Mason's toy car crash 2 years ago. That night, she baked a batch of molasses cookies. Her recipe, handwritten on a stained index card, the edges soft from use. The smell of cloves and ginger filled the kitchen like a memory trying to muscle its way back in. She placed them on a glass plate, tied with red ribbon, and left them on the counter with a note. "For the boys. From Grandma." By morning, the note was crumpled in the trash. The plate sat empty in the sink, crumbs still clinging to the rim. But the cookies weren't eaten. The trash lid lifted just enough to reveal the pile, her molasses cookies on top, untouched, discarded like flyers. Rachel breezed into the kitchen, phone in hand, thumbs moving fast. Evelyn said nothing. "You know, Evelyn," Rachel said suddenly, still not looking up, "when you do things like this, it feels like a guilt trip, like a passive-aggressive little show." "I baked cookies," Evelyn replied evenly. "That's all." Rachel laughed. "No, you staged a martyr act. Again." Evelyn stared at her for a moment, long enough for Rachel to shift uncomfortably and retreat upstairs. That afternoon, Evelyn began packing. Not loudly, not in a hurry. Just small, deliberate acts of preservation. She took down the blue and white porcelain plate her husband bought on their 10th anniversary, wrapped it in dish towels, slipped it into a box she labeled in neat cursive, "Dining room, keep." She pulled photo albums from the hall closet, marked her name in Sharpie on the spine. From the upstairs linen chest, she retrieved the quilt her mother made before she passed, folded it carefully, tracing the worn seams with a finger that didn't shake. By the time Mason came home from school, 3 labeled boxes lined the edge of Evelyn's bedroom wall. "Grandma?" he asked, peeking in, backpack half-zipped. "Are we moving?" She looked at him, startled by the "we." She sat down on the bed and opened her arms. He clambered into them like he used to when he was small enough to swing from her arms. "Not you, baby," she said, smoothing his hair. "Not you." That night, when the house was quiet, Evelyn opened her laptop and refreshed her email. There it was, subject line, "Secure closing packet, confidential." From Carly Downs, discrete property transfer services attached, final paperwork, title reassignment, buyer wiring details, official close date, January 2nd. Evelyn stared at the glowing screen. her reflection caught in the dark glass beside it. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just clicked download. Evelyn sat across from the estate attorney in a glass-walled office 6 stories above King Street. Outside, the branches of a nearby oak swayed against a gray sky dusted with flurries. Inside, the air hummed low with HVAC and the distant tapping of paralegals' keyboards. "I'll be honest, Ms. Shaw," the attorney said, adjusting his tortoiseshell frames. "This is one of the most organized portfolios I've seen in months." Evelyn gave a quiet smile. "I used to teach high school English. You learn to keep your ducks in a row or drown in paperwork." He chuckled politely and turned to the document in front of him. "So, let's walk through the updates to your trust." He spoke evenly, but Evelyn heard the weight behind every clause he read aloud. Item 1. Scott Shaw and Rachel Shaw are hereby removed as beneficiaries from the Evelyn M. Shaw Living Trust, effective immediately. She nodded. Item 2. A new educational trust will be formed, exclusively for Mason and Noah Shaw, to be accessed once they each complete a bachelor's degree from an accredited university. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment and pictured the boys. Mason bent over a Lego Star Wars manual, tongue poking from the side of his mouth, Noah reciting dinosaur facts like gospel. Item 3. The attorney continued, any attempt to contest the trust or its terms by a removed party will result in the automatic forfeiture of any indirect claims, material or custodial. Evelyn opened her eyes. Good. Would you like to assign a trustee? Yes, she said. Carly Downs. The attorney raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He scribbled her name down and slid the thick packet toward her. Initial here, signature there, notarized on page 4. Her pen moved smoothly across each line. No hesitation. The act was clinical, yes, but it pulsed with something deeper, a kind of gentle ferocity. The same resolve she'd once used to fight for textbooks in underfunded classrooms, or to tutor a failing student after hours while the rest of the faculty gave up. When the last page was signed, the attorney said, Everything will be official by noon tomorrow. You'll receive digital confirmation and hard copies by mail. Thank you, she said, rising. He extended a hand, then hesitated. I know this wasn't easy. She looked at him evenly. Actually, it was. In the lobby, a Christmas tree stood beside the elevators, 8 feet tall and modestly decorated in red ribbons and paper snowflakes. One ornament caught her eye, a simple, hand-drawn bell, likely from a child's craft table. It reminded her of a classroom from decades ago. Blunt scissors, dried glue, fingers sticky with glitter. For the first time in weeks, her chest felt light. Her phone buzzed as she stepped into the elevator. Carly. Buyer-approved final terms. Ready to close in 2 days. Evelyn read the message twice. She didn't smile, not exactly. But the corners of her mouth lifted into something firmer than joy. Satisfaction. As the elevator doors closed, her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored interior. Steady, undiminished. No longer background noise in her own life. She tapped the screen and replied, Evelyn. Let's close it. Rachel stood in front of the mantel, phone angled high for Instagram, speaking with that polished lilt reserved for her followers. This is our forever home, she said, flipping her hair as she panned the camera from the tree to the staircase. We really wanted this year's Christmas to feel curated, a blend of modern tradition and cozy elegance. You know, home, but elevated. She paused, adjusted a throw pillow, then added with a little wink, Nothing beats waking up in our house on Christmas morning. Behind her, Evelyn crossed the hallway in silence. She caught her own faint blur in the background of Rachel's screen just before it cut to a new clip. No greeting, no eye contact. She'd become a shadow in her own home, an echo of its memory. Later that evening, Evelyn brought out a small wrapped box, modest but carefully done, tied with silver ribbon and a handwritten label. To Rachel, wishing you a peaceful season. She found her in the kitchen, opening delivery boxes and transferring store-bought cookies to a platter as if they were homemade. Evelyn offered the gift with a steady hand. Oh, Rachel said, surprised. She peeled off the paper and pulled out a box of artisanal lavender soap. "That's quaint. It reminded me of you," Evelyn said, her voice smooth as warm tea. "Old-fashioned but soft. Lasts a while." Rachel laughed under her breath, not quite knowing how to take it. "Well, thanks, it's very—" She sniffed it. "It's definitely got that old lady scent." Evelyn smiled. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Rachel blinked. "Excuse me?" But Evelyn had already turned toward the dining room. She didn't slam drawers, she didn't storm. She merely adjusted a placemat slightly to the left and moved on. 1,000 quiet rebellions in slow motion. That night she laid out the boys' gifts on the foot of their shared bed, a new sketch pad for Mason, a junior science kit for Noah. Each came with a note folded carefully inside. She made her bed in the sunroom again. It still smelled faintly of dog from a pet that died years ago, and the heater clicked every 10 minutes like a nervous tick. The draft whistled under the old doorframe. In the dark, she heard Mason's voice float through the crack of the door. "Why does Grandma sleep down there?" he whispered. Rachel's reply was muffled, dismissive. "She likes her privacy." Evelyn shut her eyes. In the morning, she made French toast before anyone else was up. She added a splash of orange zest, her signature. The kitchen smelled like something living again. Mason patted in with bedhead and tired eyes. "Smells good." "I made extra," she said. "Can I eat with you?" Of course. They sat together, no devices, just fork clinks and the creak of old wood chairs. Midway through their second slice, Evelyn's phone buzzed on the counter. A text banner lit the screen. "Carly, buyers want to do a walkthrough tomorrow. 10 a.m. Is the house clear?" Evelyn's fork paused midair. "Everything okay?" Mason asked, syrup dotting his lip. She reached for a napkin and dabbed it gently. "Just a reminder." "For what?" Evelyn smiled softly. "For something I've waited a long time to finish." The couple stood by the farmhouse sink, sunlight from the bay window pooling around their feet like warm honey. The woman, Dana, ran her hand along the quartz countertop Rachel insisted on 2 years ago, though Evelyn had paid for it. "The light in here is just—" She inhaled. "It feels lived in, but not worn out." Evelyn nodded softly, not mentioning the roast she'd burned there in 1981, her first Thanksgiving as a homeowner, standing beside her husband as the smoke curled up toward the ceiling fan they hadn't figured out how to use yet. "This is where it all happened," she said, more to herself than to the couple. "The boys learned how to crack eggs over that counter. Badly." The man chuckled. "This whole place feels like it raised someone." Evelyn met his eyes. "It did." Carly trailed behind them, clipboard in hand, her posture relaxed but purposeful. She'd chosen this time slot for a reason. Rachel was off at a dental appointment, and Scott was doing some kind of client pitch in Arlington. Evelyn had confirmed it. They moved into the dining room. The table, covered with a crisp linen runner, stood polished and proud. It wasn't a fancy piece, just solid oak from a long-gone department store. Evelyn rested her hand on one of its edges. "First Thanksgiving was here," she murmured. "The boys, my husband and I, we had meatloaf and boxed mashed potatoes. Couldn't afford the turkey that year." Dana smiled, her voice gentler. "You can feel the history here. It's sacred." Evelyn didn't blink. They stopped treating it that way. Outside, she walked the couple to the back patio, where the modest garden waited. The rosemary had gone woody, but the sage still pushed its way through the soil, gray and brave in the winter chill. "My husband planted this when Mason was born," Evelyn said. "He believed in keeping something alive for every milestone, said roots matter." The man crouched beside the small patch and nodded. "We just got married last year. We've been looking for some place we could actually grow into. This feels like the one." Evelyn exhaled, slow. Her coat fluttered slightly in the December wind, but she didn't shiver. Back inside, Carly cleared her throat delicately. "They're prepared to wire the earnest deposit today. Full cash offer. 30-day close is doable, but they'd prefer a quick move-in. Mid-January?" Evelyn glanced at the hallway that led to the sunroom. her makeshift bedroom. Then at the photos still lining the mantel, weddings, birthdays, the boys in Halloween costumes. "I'll be out by January 2nd. Carly smiled faintly, already noting the date. "I'll prepare the revised timeline." The couple signed their section of the closing documents then and there, hands trembling with excitement. Evelyn signed hers without ceremony, her pen fluid, her jaw steady. No hesitation. They thanked her profusely, shook hands, and walked out the door as if they'd just stepped into the rest of their lives. Once they were gone, Evelyn stood alone in the living room. The ticking wall clock, once muted by chaos, now sounded unnervingly loud. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply sat at the base of the stairs and stared at the banister where Mason had once slid down wearing a Batman cape, despite her repeated warnings. Upstairs, she began folding her sweaters, her old lesson binders, the blanket with frayed edges that she refused to let Rachel donate. Each item disappeared into boxes with military precision. She was mid-wrap on a ceramic vase when Rachel's voice cut through the silence from the hallway below. "I was thinking," Rachel called out, "next year we're remodeling that whole kitchen. It's just so dated." Evelyn froze, her hands suspended over the bubble wrap. The closing documents were signed. Ownership had legally transferred. But Rachel didn't know. Not yet. Evelyn worked by the soft amber glow of a desk lamp, the house hushed beneath the hum of a distant dryer cycle. It was the evening of December 29th, and every tick of the old wall clock carried the final weight of memory. Her hands, steady and sure, moved across crisp envelopes as she slipped 2 folded letters inside, each marked with a name in neat cursive: Mason and Noah. The letters weren't dramatic, just full of truth. She told them what good boys they were, how she'd watched them grow with pride, that they should ask questions always and treat kindness as currency, that she had never left them. She had simply chosen herself, finally. Beside each envelope, she stacked a small bundle, a worn hardback journal with an oak leaf pressed inside the front page, a photo of them baking cookies in the kitchen, a book from her school days, To Kill a Mockingbird for Mason, Holes for Noah. Inside each book, she wrote one line: "Use your words to make people feel less alone." She tied them in ribbon and placed them in a shoebox, one labeled in pencil, "For my boys." For Scott, she left nothing. Not out of spite, out of decision. She knew he wouldn't look for a note. He'd search for keys, documents, or explanations. She owed him none. By dawn on December 30th, frost glazed the hedges out front, giving the house a sugar-dusted stillness. Evelyn moved quietly, packing the last box into the back of a modest rental truck parked a few houses down. She didn't slam doors or leave lights blazing. She wore navy slacks, a wool coat, and pearl earrings, not for show, but because she refused to enter her new life in sweatpants and defeat. The boys had left earlier that morning for a sleepover. Scott and Rachel were at a downtown hotel, prepping for their tacky New Year's Eve, black tie but fun bash. Evelyn had overheard the plans. That was why she'd chosen today, perfectly unnoticed. Inside, she did one last sweep. Her fingers paused on the banister, the slight groove where a plastic dinosaur once bit into the wood, the wall near the pantry where Mason's pencil-marked height had once reached Rachel's fury. In the dining room, the table gleamed with new polish but old soul. Evelyn placed her hand on it for the last time. "Still eats," she whispered, just loud enough for the silence to catch it. Then, as she turned toward the door, she added, "Still owns." Outside, the air stung her cheeks. She didn't wince. As she climbed into the truck, she felt no triumph, no regret, just space, glorious, earned space. She drove 10 minutes across Alexandria to a senior co-op nestled between 2 parks and within walking distance of a library and her favorite bakery. She'd toured it twice with Carly. It wasn't grand, but it had a reading nook, 2 small bedrooms, and a balcony that caught the sunrise. By noon, she was sipping tea from her thermos and watching movers place her boxes by the window with quiet care. Her new key, a simple silver one, sat in her coat pocket. At 6:42 p.m., her phone buzzed once. A text lit up the screen. "Buyer. Looking forward to our January 2nd walkthrough. Hope they're ready for the surprise." She set the phone down slowly, then picked up her tea again, cradling it with both hands. The boys would get their boxes in 2 days. She had arranged for them to be placed in their room before bedtime. No drama, no announcement, just a trail of love that bypassed the unworthy. Scott Shaw stood in the center of the freshly vacuumed living room, grinning, flanked by 2 colleagues in slim-fit blazers. The fireplace crackled dutifully, the smell of cinnamon-scented candles drifting through the air. On the kitchen island, Rachel had laid out an Instagrammable spread: charcuterie, fig jam, champagne flutes lined in gold foil, and a handwritten place card that read, "Our home. Our rules." Outside, the porch wreath still clung to a bit of frost, but inside, warmth buzzed. Cocktail jazz hummed from the Bluetooth speakers, and guests complimented the crown molding like it was new. Rachel twirled once in her heels and took a slow panoramic video of the dining room. "Our first open house," she narrated, panning from the chandelier to the granite countertops, careful to capture only the home's updated angles. She didn't know the irony of her choice of words. Open house. Then, at 3:17 p.m., the doorbell rang. Scott, still riding the high of showing off, strode to the front door and yanked it open like the master of ceremonies. His smile faltered instantly. Standing there was Carly Downs, clipboard in hand, her winter coat dusted with the faintest sheen of snow. Beside her stood a couple in their mid-40s, well-dressed, nervous smiles, holding a manila folder. "Scott Shaw?" Carly said evenly, her breath visible in the cold. "Yes," he replied, frowning. "We're here for the final walkthrough. Buyers. Closing contract signed December 30th. Welcome to the transition." There was a beat of complete silence. Behind him, someone let out a soft chuckle, thinking it was part of some real estate-themed party joke. Then Rachel appeared beside Scott, wineglass in hand, and stared at Carly. "What is this?" she asked, blinking. Carly offered a crisp, rehearsed smile. "Your mother executed the sale last week. The deed was never jointly owned. Evelyn Shaw listed the property as sole owner. It transferred legally to the Bensons." She gestured to the couple. "As of 9 a.m. today, I emailed notice of the walkthrough 3 days ago." Scott's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He took the folder automatically when the mail buyer handed it to him. Inside was a copy of the executed deed, Evelyn's signature neat and exact. There was a post-it stuck to one page. It read, "Please return any mail addressed to me. I've forwarded most of it already. E." "Wait," Rachel said sharply, her voice cracking as she stepped forward. "You mean this is real? This is done?" Carly glanced over the rim of her glasses. "Finalized. Recorded. Public record as of this morning." "Evelyn?" Scott said, dazed, fumbling for his phone. She couldn't," he called her. The phone rang twice, then went straight to voicemail. "Hey, Mom, call me. Now, please." No response. Rachel sat down hard on one of the bar stools. "She really did it," she whispered. "She actually—" Carly, unfazed, addressed the buyers with a warm tone. "Let's begin the walkthrough with the upstairs, shall we? You'll want to verify the condition matches inspection." Scott remained frozen, his gaze flicking between the buyers, the paper in his hand, and the guests now murmuring with half-hidden amusement and horror. His home, his kingdom, was slipping out from under him. Rachel grabbed the manila folder from him and turned to the final page. Her hand trembled. "No co-ownership," she whispered. We were never on the title." Her voice cracked on the last word. Scott sat hunched over his laptop, his thumb twitching against the touchpad. The soft glow of the screen lit up the darkened kitchen where just days ago he'd popped champagne for friends who now wouldn't return his texts. His fingers flew through poorly worded search queries: fraudulent house sale by parent, reverse deed transfer, real estate inheritance rights adult son, but each result only deepened the pit in his stomach. Every headline, every blog post, every lawyer forum said the same thing. If your name wasn't on the deed, it was never your house. Rachel paced behind him in a threadbare robe, mascara smudged under her eyes like war paint. "Scott," she snapped, "you told me we were fine." That it was just a technicality. Her voice cracked on the last word. Scott didn't answer. He was too focused on the email from the real estate lawyer he'd contacted that morning. It read, "Mr. Shaw, after reviewing the public records, your mother, Evelyn Shaw, has always been the sole title holder of the property. Unless you can prove coercion or mental incompetence, which is unlikely given the clean legal trail, there are no grounds for a challenge. Regards, Glenn Everett, Esquire." He stared at that word, sole, like a hammer to the chest. Rachel stormed into the living room and grabbed a manila folder from the coffee table. "What about the kitchen remodel? The new paint in the dining room? The landscaping? We paid for that." "No," Scott said flatly, standing. "Evelyn did. I found the receipts, her name, her card, all of it. She let us think we did it." The room shrank under Rachel's silence. Mason, barefoot, peeked around the corner. "Why is Mom crying?" Noah stood beside him, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Go back to your room," Scott barked, harsher than he intended. Rachel dropped the folder on the ground with a flat thud. "What do we tell them?" she whispered. "That Grandma kicked us out?" Scott didn't answer. That afternoon, a letter was taped to the front door. Polite, professional, devastating. Final notice of possession transfer. "Dear occupants, per the executed agreement, the property is now under ownership of the Benson family. Please vacate the premises within 10 business days. Sincerely, Carly Downs, Real Estate Legal Services." Rachel read it 3 times before slumping onto the stairs and curling into herself like a discarded coat. 10 days? She muttered. "Where the hell are we supposed to go in 10 days? Scott picked up a nearby lamp and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 shards beneath Evelyn's old bookshelf, one Rachel had nearly given to Goodwill last spring. Mason flinched. Noah teared up. Rachel, shaking, did the one thing she still knew how to do. She opened her phone, hit record, and began a tearful live stream. Her voice wavered. "I just want everyone to know, we've been displaced. My mother-in-law sold our house out from under us. No warning. After everything we did, after I hosted her holidays and cleaned up after her messes, this is how we're treated." But the comments weren't kind. "Sounds like it was never yours to begin with. Imagine living off your mom's house and calling it your kitchen. Entitled much?" She ended the video early. By nightfall, boxes were pulled from the attic, labeled with Sharpie and Fury. Mason helped fold his clothes while Rachel sobbed quietly in the laundry room. Noah just sat in the hallway with his backpack already zipped. Across town, in a cozy 1-bedroom unit overlooking a courtyard of pines, Evelyn closed the blinds on her new senior co-op apartment. She lit a small candle on the windowsill and unpacked a ceramic dish, her favorite pie plate from 1986. It survived everything. She sat on the couch with a book and a cup of chamomile, peace resting in the quiet like a long-lost friend. The skillet hissed as Evelyn cracked the yolk with a practiced nudge of her spatula. Morning light spilled into the galley kitchen, painting the linoleum floor in gold. The smell of peppered eggs and toasted rye lingered in the air, and for once, there were no footsteps overhead, no microwave slamming shut before it hit 1 minute. No Rachel sighing because the coffee wasn't her roast. Just Evelyn, her breath even, her kitchen hers. She moved to the balcony with her plate, the steam curling upward in the chill January air. A cardinal landed. On the railing, puffed round and red like a winter jewel. She reached for her tea and took a long sip, breathing in peace that tasted faintly of lemon and honey. The view wasn't grand, just the courtyard of the senior co-op, a few tidy shrubs, some folding chairs abandoned in frost, but it was hers. The breakfast nook behind her was only big enough for 2, but it fit her and her quiet just fine. After washing her dish, Evelyn slid on her coat and made her way to the library 2 blocks down, her knees creaking but her pace steady. She waved at Janet, who ran the front desk, then headed to the children's corner where the storytime mats were already unfurled. A dozen little faces stared up at her as she opened blueberries for Sal. Her voice had that teacher's cadence, gentle, assured, just sing-song enough to keep a squirmy toddler pinned in place. "Kerplunk," she read, tapping her finger on the page. Little Sal dropped a blueberry into her small tin pail. Afterward, a boy named Kenny offered her a peanut butter cracker with sticky fingers. She accepted it like communion. That afternoon, her mailbox held a single card, postmarked 2 towns over, child's handwriting on the front. Evelyn carried it inside carefully, peeling the flap open like it was fine parchment. Inside, scrawled in blue marker, "Dear Grandma, I miss you. Dad says we can't talk, but I don't care. I hope you're happy. Hope to see you soon. Love, Mason." Her throat caught. She pressed the card to her chest, then folded it shut and placed it on the mantel beside a tiny frame. A photo of her husband holding baby Scott in one arm and a garden spade in the other. She gave them both a silent nod. Later that evening, she called the school office, left a voicemail for Mason's guidance counselor requesting a message be passed to him. "Tell him Grandma got his letter. And that I'm always here, baby." She didn't need to say more. Dinner was soup and half a sandwich. She ate slowly, television off, savoring each bite. Every spoonful felt earned, each moment unmarred by snide commentary or Rachel's over-perfumed presence drifting in and out like bad weather. As she cleaned up, her phone buzzed. Evelyn reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting a robocall, but the screen showed a news clip sent by Gail from the Deeded Women group chat. The headline blinked across a local broadcast still, "Instagram influencer evicted after shady deed deal." Evelyn tapped it open. The reporter's voice floated out. Earlier today, a once popular lifestyle influencer known for promoting luxury homemaking was evicted from what sources confirm was never legally her home. The camera panned to Rachel outside the house, hair askew, sunglasses hiding nothing. "We were ambushed," she barked at the camera, clutching Noah's hand. "This is what elder betrayal looks like." The comments rolled in live beneath the video. "Try owning the place before calling it yours." "Plot twist. Grandma is a queen. This ain't betrayal, it's boundaries." Evelyn's smile returned, slow and deep. She turned off the screen. Outside, the wind rustled bare branches like distant applause. The scent of rosemary, lemon, and slow-roasted turkey wafted through Evelyn's condo, curling around the corners of the living room like a warm hug. The small space pulsed with laughter and the clatter of mixing bowls. It wasn't grand. There was no vaulted ceiling or Pinterest-perfect centerpiece. But what it lacked in pretense, it made up for in something rarer: ease. Evelyn stood at the stove, her apron lightly dusted with flour, as Mason chopped celery with exaggerated concentration. Noah sat at the breakfast nook, stringing cranberries and popcorn into a garland for the bookshelf. Across the room, Scott's younger sister, Erin, uncorked a bottle of sparkling apple cider and raised her brow toward Evelyn. "You've got real soldiers here, Ev," she said. "I didn't know boys this age could chop without bloodshed." Mason grinned. "Grandma's a good teacher." Evelyn didn't reply. She just winked and handed him the parsley. This was the Thanksgiving she hadn't known she'd wanted. Quiet, yes, but not lonely. She'd spent most of her adult life planning holiday meals down to the tablespoon, timing side dishes to the minute. Now she stirred stuffing while humming along to an old Temptations record spinning softly in the corner. Erin danced as she basted the turkey, swaying and mouthing lyrics like it was 1968. Evelyn glanced toward the hallway, where a familiar rectangular platter rested on the sideboard, white ceramic with faint chips on the edge and a painted outline of a turkey. It had traveled with her through 4 decades of holidays, through her husband's hands, then Scott's clumsy attempts, and now back to hers. She'd almost left it behind. Almost. "Want to bring out the big guy?" Erin asked, nodding toward the oven. Evelyn nodded. "Let's carve." They placed the turkey on the platter together. Noah stood beside Evelyn, wide-eyed. "Do I get a drumstick?" "You get 2 if you keep setting that table like a pro," she teased. They moved to the dining table, modest but sturdy. Cloth napkins, No centerpiece, just a small candle flickering low. As they settled into their chairs, Evelyn handed Mason the carving knife. "Want to try?" He looked nervous. "I'll mess it up." Evelyn took it gently from him. "Then I'll show you." Her hands were firm, deliberate, each slice smooth, elegant. A quiet reversal of that day a year ago, the sneer, the mockery, the laugh that followed her like smoke. But here, now, her every motion reclaimed that moment. Each cut, an exhale. Mason watched her. "You still eat better than Dad?" he said suddenly. Everyone laughed, genuine, full-throated. Even Evelyn. Dinner was warm and full of stories about her husband's first attempt at deep-frying a turkey. "The garage still smells like smoke," Aaron quipped. About Noah's school crush. About Mason's plan to try out for basketball. Evelyn listened more than she spoke, but when she spoke, everyone paused. She was no longer invisible. Not here. After pie, the boys curled on the couch to play a card game, and Aaron helped clear dishes. "You ever regret it?" Aaron asked quietly, drying a plate. Evelyn glanced toward the boys, then at the candle still burning low. "No," she said. "Only that I waited so long." The doorbell rang mid-afternoon, just as Evelyn was settling onto her armchair with a second helping of cranberry sauce. She opened the door to find a courier holding a cream-colored envelope, her name typed in a serif font across the front. She signed for it, closed the door, and tore it open with the side of her thumb. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper from her lawyer's office. Notice: maturity date. Approaching. Educational Trust Fund for Mason and Noah Shaw will vest in 60 days. Please confirm next step instructions. Evelyn smiled. The lawyer's letter sat on the kitchen counter like an unopened fortune, but Evelyn already knew what it said. She had written every clause herself. Still, when she slipped it from the envelope that morning, the crisp certainty of the legal phrasing made something in her spine lengthen. The Shaw Educational Trust is set to mature on January 15th. Please confirm final disbursement terms. She took a slow breath, then picked up her pen. Evelyn sat at her modest dining table, now dressed in a new table runner that Mason had helped her pick out from a thrift store. Her laptop hummed beside her, the cursor blinking patiently as she typed in final updates to her estate plan. No sentiment, just strategy. She adjusted the distribution line, ensuring 50% of her assets, what remained after the sale, the investments, the royalties from a children's reading guide she'd helped co-author, would go to scholarships for students at Alexandria's public schools. Her school, her students, her legacy. She signed the updated will in clean black ink, then slid the documents into a large manila envelope and clasped it shut. There was no heaviness, no guilt, just precision. The cold air bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside, scarf pulled tight, envelope tucked under her arm. She walked the 6 blocks to the school office like she had 1,000 times in her life, back when mornings were about lunch counts and permission slips. The walls looked smaller now, the bricks more worn, but the heartbeat of the place hadn't changed. The secretary, a new face, younger, cheerful, greeted her with a smile. "Hi there, can I help you?" "I'm Evelyn Shaw," she said. "I used to teach 5th grade here. I'm here to make a donation." The woman blinked, surprised. "Of course. Do you have a foundation name or—" "No name," Evelyn said. "Just kids who deserve a shot." She left the envelope on the counter, refusing a receipt. Back home, the late sun cast long shadows through her living room windows. She changed into her softest cardigan, put the kettle on, and set the small folding table beside her husband's photo, the one taken on their honeymoon, long before life got loud. She placed a single lit candle next to the frame, the flame dancing in his smiling reflection. "We raised them," she whispered, lifting her mug. "They forgot. But we never did." Outside, wind stirred the leaves on her balcony. Inside, everything was still. She opened her freezer and pulled out the last of the Thanksgiving leftovers, slices of white and dark meat, wrapped tight in foil, stored with care. She plated them neatly and warmed them in the oven. The smell of sage and butter filled her home again. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't even a Sunday, but Evelyn felt it. A moment worth honoring. She plated the turkey, crisped at the edges, and spooned a bit of cranberry relish on the side. The same platter, the one Scott once mocked her for, the one she'd kept. She sat alone, the knife in her hand steady. She carved the slices with care. It wasn't just tradition, it was ownership. Of her past, of her peace, of the fight she never thought she'd have to wage, but didn't hesitate to win. As she chewed, she thought not of Scott, or Rachel, or even the stinging silence they'd left behind. She thought of the card Mason had drawn, "Best Grandma Ever," in thick, uncertain letters, and the way Noah always hugged her twice. She toasted the quiet with a sip of lemon tea. To peace, not revenge, but damn, the revenge had tasted good too.